imagine the environmental disaster of all of the masks and the gloves and everything in the pandemic. It's probably piling up somewhere.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm Susan Call. I'm the events advisor here at Politics and Prose. Can you all hear me okay? Yes. And on behalf of our owners and our entire staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you tonight. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Please remember to silence your cell phones. We're going to have a Q&A after the event, and we have a microphone right there. If you don't mind stepping up to the mic, we're recording this event. We have signed books behind the register, and we also ask if you don't mind helping us by folding up your chair and just leaning it against something after the event. That would be helpful. And please be sure to take a look at our website. We've got some great events the rest of November and already into next year, as well as trips and classes. And now it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's author, Dr. Joy Buolamwini, to discuss her topical and alarming new book, Unmasking AI, My Mission to Protect What is Human in a World of Machines, which Kirkus has called a timely call to action about the near and present danger of AI systems. Dr. Buolamwini, who says we can also call her Dr. Joy, has been described as a poet of code, and in fact, we're going to hear some poetry from her tonight as well. Her book is about the existential risks produced by big tech, including the encoded discrimination and exclusion in tech products. She is the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, a groundbreaking researcher and a renowned speaker. Her writing has been featured in publications including Time, the New York Times, and the Atlantic, and she's the recipient of numerous awards, including a Rhodes Scholarship, the inaugural Morals and Machines Prize, and the Technological Innovation Award from the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. And she's the protagonist of the Emmy-nominated documentary Coded Bias. She'll be in conversation tonight with Damon Hewitt, who has a long and distinguished bio. I'm sharing only some of it here tonight. He's a civil rights lawyer, a social justice strategist, a philanthropist, and coalition builder, and he currently serves as the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Prior to joining the Lawyers Committee, he served as inaugural executive director of the Executives Alliance for Boys and Men of Color, and he previously served as a senior advisor at the Open Society Foundation, where he coordinated funding efforts responding to the uprising in Ferguson, Missouri. And before entering philanthropy, he worked for more than a decade at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. He holds a BA in political science from Louisiana State and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania, and he's co-author of a book, The School to Prison Pipeline. Please join me in welcoming a warm welcome to Dr. Joy Buolamwini and Damon Hewitt, and we're going to begin with a poetry reading. Thank you.
Realizing the irony of all these masks at a Unmasking AI event, so I appreciate you all. I am going to read a poem I wrote earlier this year as the frenzy around generative AI systems started to pick up, and it is called Unstable Desire. Unstable desire. Prompted to competition, where be the guardrails now? Threat in sight will might make right. Hallucinations taken as prophecy. Destabilized on a middling journey to outpace, to open chase, to claim supremacy, to reign indefinitely. Haste and paste, control altering deletion. Unstable desire remains undefeated. The fate of AI, still uncompleted. Responding with fear, responsible AI beware. Prophets do snare, people still dare to believe our humanity is more than neural nets and transformations of collected muses, more than data and errata, more than transactional diffusions. Are we not transcendent beings bound in transient forms? Can this power be guided with care, augmenting delight alongside economic destitution? Temporary band-aids cannot hold the wind when the task ahead is to transform the atmosphere of innovation. The android dreams entice, the nightmare schemes of vice. Thank you. Appreciate it. Let me hop up in these boots.
All right. And what an introduction to Dr. Joy. Another round of applause.
Thank you.
So we'll jump right into the conversation, and of course we'll have time for Q&A for you all to engage. So, Dr. Joy, this book, congratulations on the book, this work, and your entire body of work. It's so deeply informative, thought-provoking, but it's also a deeply personal story. What I read in a sense was a vulnerability, but from a place of strength, or a strength from a place of vulnerability, however you want to consider it. What made you want to tell your story about your work in your life, and in this way, and why now?
Thank you for that. It didn't start out vulnerable. At first, I thought it was going to be a science communications book, SciComm, either science communications or science comedy. And then as I was writing it, I was working with a book coach, and they would keep asking, how'd you feel? Tell us about your childhood. Readers want to know who you are. Like, is that actually that critical? Next thing I know, we got a part memoir thing going on, as well as the AI element. And so it wasn't my initial intent to write from a place of vulnerability and strength, but I actually think the book is better for it, because I wanted to take people behind the scenes of what it is to be a young grad student, challenging some of the biggest companies in the world with what's supposed to be the most cutting edge technology being developed. And so I wanted to invite people also into the struggle I had as somebody who was really optimistic about tech. I got into tech because I didn't want to deal with humans too much. I was like, ooh, this math abstraction sounds fun, right? And so the other bit of it I wanted to share was to humanize those people who are being harmed by technology, and also to humanize the people who are creating the technology as well. And in order to do that, it required getting into more of the personal aspect.
And I love that second part, the nod to the creators out there, because I think that's what initially drew you to the work, the great possibilities, right, from what I've read about your work. And that balance, I think, is one of the things that gives you such, I won't say just credibility, but just such purchase with so many people. That makes you a voice of authority. You're not just throwing bricks, you're making bricks at the same time, so to speak, right? So, you begin the book with an encounter about what you call the coded gaze. Can you explain to our audience what that is?
Yeah, so how many of you have heard of the male gaze? The white gaze? The post-colonial gaze? Okay, so the coded gaze is a cousin concept, which is really about power. Who has the power to shape what's worthy? Who has the power to shape our priorities? And also, who has the power to embed their prejudices, whether intentional or otherwise, into the technology that we're creating? And so I wanted a way of naming the type of algorithmic bias and algorithmic discrimination that I was seeing, that would also link to former terms. And so that's how the coded gaze term came about. But the experience behind it was, as a grad student, and based on what you see on the cover, I was working on an art project. Again, trying to have fun with tech. I was not actually going down this path of social justice, which I'm down now. And as I was working on this graduate student project, the software I had downloaded to track my face wasn't tracking my face that well. It happened to be around Halloween, and I happened to have a white mask in my office. And so actually, even before I tried the white mask, I drew a face on my hand, and the face on my hand got detected. So after that, I was like, okay, anything is up for grabs in the office. So that's when I grabbed the white mask, and before I even put it all the way over my face, it had already been detected. And I was like, dang, Fanon already said it, black skin, white mask. But I didn't think it would be so literal to be at this epicenter of innovation, the future factory, the school I've always wanted to go to, and then find myself coding in whiteface. And so that was the emergence of the coded gaze for me.
What a metaphor and a literal. And it's not just, from the videos I've seen, it's not just the mask being recognized, but it's like pinpoint accuracy of all the indentations and curvature. It's like, but your own face is almost as if you don't exist.
Right.
Really incredible, really incredible. So you discuss in the book how different types of people can be more vulnerable to algorithmic bias. You've talked about skin tone / race. And I say skin tone because I think there's also gradations, right?
Yeah.
In terms of skin tones amongst people of color, which is really interesting that people don't really think about. But I was also surprised to learn that children and people who are not as able-bodied, differently able people, are already feeling the impact as well. You've used the special phrase for these impacts, excoded.
Yes.
Talk to us about who are the excoded. What does excoded mean?
Absolutely. So as you can tell, I like terms, right? So from the coded gaze, we now have the excoded. And the excoded are those who are convicted, condemned, otherwise harmed by AI systems. And with that definition, that means the excoded could be you. No one is immune from AI harms, whether it's generative AI systems taking the voice of your loved one and that being used in a hoax, which I talk about in the book, right? You can be excoded and not even know it. It's the loan you never got, the mortgage that didn't come through, the job promotion that was mediated by AI decision making. What's a bit different with the examples I showed at the beginning with face detection, gender classification, and so forth, those are the harms you can see. But many of the pernicious ones, right, you wouldn't even have any kind of indication. And then we have people like Portia Woodruff, who was arrested 8 months pregnant due to AI-powered facial recognition misidentification. She reported having contractions in the holding cell and had to be rushed to the emergency room afterwards, right? Here you have two beings who are excoded, you know? And so when I think of excoded, I really think it's not a situation where you can say, oh, that's somebody else's problem, because AI is infiltrating so many areas of our lives. So who are the excoded? Us.
Incredible. So in your research, you've actually had great success, not just in the scholarly sense, but also in convincing some of the tech giants, some of the tech companies to modify, adopt their practice, or at the very least put them on notice, right, about the problems. So, but you've also encountered some skeptics, some folks who have pushed back even in your academic career when you were in your grad program, due especially to your focus on racial impacts. Yeah. Can you tell us about the reactions you received, how you navigated those, and how you countered them?
That's such a great question. I like to share a tale of 3 companies where we have a reactive kind of response, a combative response, and a proactive response. But before we get to the tale of 3 companies, as a grad student, when I shared I wanted to do this kind of work, I had a lot of people whispering in my ear, are you sure you want to do this? You might get pigeonholed. You could compromise your career if you start talking about things like bias. And you really want to talk about discrimination, racism, sexism. These were not the voices of encouragement that I had expected. And some of it actually came from people that I respect and admire. And I understand that from their perspective, they were being honest. And almost everything they said would happen did come true, just in a different order. So I'm not saying they were wrong, right? But I was fortunate enough at that time to get connected with people like Dr. Timnit Gebru and Deb Raji, who were other young Black women also exploring computer vision and who affirmed what I was doing. To the credit of the grad program I was in, they're like, we don't know what you're doing, but do what you're doing, right? So at least I had a little sandbox to explore, and not everyone has that opportunity. So first, a bit of the counter in terms of people doubting my technical ability. They're like, AI has a lot of math. Like, yeah, this is my 3rd degree, going on the 4th one, I'm good. All of that kind of thing. And so I pressed on, and I was really fortunate to have peers who supported me. And when the research came out, initially it was somewhat well received. For example, when we sent the results to IBM, they actually invited me to their headquarters. They shared a new model that had better performance than the ones we have tested. And so when I presented the research, because I had sent the companies the results ahead of time, they gave me updated results, which I shared at the conference, right? So this was more cooperative. It was reactive, right? It was like, okay, a paper's coming out. We need to do something. Microsoft, similarly, once there was a New York Times feature, then they're like, oh, wait, hold up. we should be paying attention as well. And their approach was to, okay, if we have biased systems, let's make the technology better. But accurate systems can be abused, so we can get to that a little bit later. So these are more of the reactive. Then we had combative. So after the first paper, Gender Shades, was published, there was a follow-up paper, Actionable Auditing. This time we decided to include another tech giant. They are involved with lots of books. Somehow this is Amazon's editor's pick, so I can't write my op-ed, the book Amazon doesn't want you to read. But anyways, this was my conspiracy theory about it. So anyways, when we audited Amazon recognition and showed like their peers the year before, they also had skin type bias, gender bias, and bias at the intersections, I was surprised because to me, this was like a test that had gone out the year before and the results were public. So you had a year to get better and they were where their competitors were initially. I cannot say these results were received with open arms. In fact, we had a vice president attempt to discredit the research. And this is where the community support came in. So you probably have heard of the godfathers of AI, et cetera, and so forth. One of them, a Turing Prize winner, the computer science world's Nobel Prize, actually came up and stood up for the research, as did a former chief AI scientist at Amazon. And I really commend them for taking that professional risk because they recognized that it wasn't just about me or my co-authors, but it was about this entire space of critique of AI. And this critique of AI allows us to create better systems that are beneficial for more people. And so if there was assumed to be pushback, right, people would be discouraged. And so they and other researchers came together, signed petitions, etc. Amazon eventually stopped selling facial recognition to law enforcement in 2020 after IBM took the first step and then Microsoft. So all of the companies we audited based in the US, the major ones did step back. Amazon said, we'll halt it for a while. Microsoft said until there's legislation federally, there's still no legislation federally. And IBM just said, you know what, we're gonna get out of this business. In the first place. And that was also timed, right, with the murder of George Floyd. So we have to look at this in a broader context of multiple ongoing resistance movements coming in at a particular period in time.
For sure. Well, that story of three, the trilogy, is quite interesting. It reminds me for all of the race-conscious interventions and strategies and call-outs of bias, there have been these pushbacks historically, and even I think at the beginning of my career as a civil rights attorney, I heard similar pushback. I wasn't doing TED Talks and whatnot like you, but it's such a familiar response that so many of us receive. So I hope that people really feel that. So you have done so much research. You called out some of the other younger black women at the time who were doing some of the work, who supported you, and others who supported you. But now everyone's talking about AI, at least the last 6 to 9 months. I mean, you can't even, to the extent people still flip open papers or read online, you read about AI almost every day. You and I, we did a briefing on the Hill together just a few weeks ago with Senator Cory Booker. We both have been invited to testify at these AI Insight forums. Everyone's talking about it. Industry's talking about it. We even saw these commercials from Facebook saying, well, about tech regulation generally, the last tech regulations were 25 years ago. We need new regulations. So it's almost as if they're inviting what we're talking about, but not exactly. So my question is, with everyone talking about it and there's such fervor about let's have regulations and maybe even new laws, is the research in the strategy on how to keep us safe from the technology actually keeping pace with the innovation of the technology itself?
These are all great questions. I think what I've learned most through the research I've done on our, AI, algorithmic bias, and so forth, is to think through the socio-technical aspect. And so is the research keeping pace with where research on AI is going? What's difficult for researchers right now is there are many closed systems. So you'll have large language models, the type of AI systems behind a chatbot kind of app, and it might have billions or trillions of inputs. But the companies don't necessarily disclose where all of that data came from. You've probably heard of the lawsuits, and so forth. I'm a new member of the Authors Guild and now card-carrying holder of the National Association of Voice Actors. I did the audiobook, all of those things. Right? And I remember...
That's in your X profile, voice actor. I saw that. Yeah.
I added that, because I went to an FTC hearing on the effect of generative AI on the creative economy. And that's when I learned about these associations. I was like, let me sign up, and get connected a little bit. So I do think some of the research is hindered because of access to what's actually going into the systems. But it always comes down to political will. Right. And that's what excites me about this moment, because there hasn't always been this political will. Now, of course, the devil's in the details, what will actually come out. But I still remember, even from your earlier question, there was a time when if I would say AI bias or AI discrimination, I'd get the eye roll. You tell me computers are racist now? Okay, the CPU is sexist. What's going on? A lot of eye rolling and that sort of thing. So for it to be on the presidential agenda, for it to be on the agenda of the UN, right? There's a new AI advisory council, for there to have just been an AI safety summit convened in the UK. Right. I think about what the conversation was in 2016 to where it is now, and I certainly see progress.
Shifting in public discourse and consciousness is a predicate, perhaps, to shift in the culture and the policy, right? So that's very insightful. So you wrote a paper, we published a paper in 2018 entitled Gender Shades, Intersectional Accuracy Disparities in Commercial Gender Classification. Y'all, that's racist and sexist, basically. That's what you could paraphrase it as, right?
Usually people just end at gender shades. I appreciate that you gave it its full title.
It deserves the fullness. It deserves the fullness.
I appreciate that.
So just like some of your other work, that paper prompted a number of the tech giants to take some action in a positive direction, improving software products. Others have since assessed and improved on some of those processes. So there is constant evolution to a degree, but what do you think tech companies should be doing right now to prevent harms, both current and future, and to promote AI that can be used in a positive and helpful way?
Right now, I hear a lot of conversation about preventing AI harms. And I also see increased research, right, in areas of AI fairness or transparency and accountability. And what I often see rarely mentioned, if at all, is the question of redress. So yes, we will do our best, to create the system so they're not harmful. But what about the people who've already been harmed? And what about the harms that come later on? So maybe your tires were certified, but you still got a flat on the road. What are we gonna do? So I do think something I want all companies to be thinking about, and also governments in particular, because they have the public interest at heart, or should have it at heart, is what redress looks like. So part of this is having incident reporting or harms reporting mechanisms set in place. This is something we're doing at the Algorithmic Justice League with our excoded. Remember, we talked about the excoded, so we have an excoded experiences platform, and people share what's happening with them, right? Like, my kid got flagged for cheating. Turns out English is a second language. Not actually cheating, Or I went to the airport. They scanned in my face. Don't I have options? Yes, you do. You can opt out. I was actually flying here from Boston, and people were just walking up to the camera. And I said, "Oh, can I opt out?" And he's like, yeah. I was like, "Oh, do you have to tell me?" He's like, "No." Then his person kind of recognized me. He's like, no, we have to tell you. And there's a sign right there, But all this to say, sometimes there's this coerced consent. And I think that there's also an obligation from tech company service providers and also those who adopt their systems, right, to make sure we're not having manufactured consent and people are fully informed.
And it's our own reliance and use of these systems and platforms that kind of traps us as well, right? Like, we just, the coerced consent just snowballs because we keep using and using and using, and all of a sudden we don't know any other way.
But I would give us a little bit of slack in that, for example, I think of the IRS when they adopted a third-party facial recognition vendor. And it was supposed to be optional. So I decided to investigate, So I try to sign up. And if you had an old account, you didn't have to use it. But for new people, you had to use it. So I was like, okay, let me read this privacy policy. Let me read the terms of service. Turns out if you sign up for this thing, which is now the only option if you weren't already a prior user, now you have to agree to this third party's conditions. One of those conditions is you waive your right to do a class action lawsuit, and they're not liable if anything goes wrong. So now you're trying to access basic tax services. Do you have a choice?
Right.
I don't put that kind of system on, kind of decision on us as much.
Hence coercive. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So you were featured, of course, in the, as you heard earlier, the documentary Coded Bias, and you've been the face of the Olay Decode the Bias ad campaign about beauty bias. So from those experiences, what do you think that media companies or media campaigns for other companies should be thinking and doing when it comes to artificial intelligence?
I think the biggest takeaway I had from doing the campaign and doing the documentary is the power of storytelling. Might not be so surprising that only so many people read my research, right? I mean, 4,000 citations is huge in the research world, but to be on a platform that had at the time 200 million subscribers gives it and translated into 30 languages gives it a different type of reach. And so when I saw people saying, man, I started doing data science because I said the thing, and I was still in grad school, so I felt motivated to do my homework. I was like, people out here getting degrees, I need to finish mine, that kind of thing. But also, so when Olay, Procter & Gamble came and they wanted to do campaign with me, I had a better understanding of the reach of that, right? So to be a computer scientist and be in September Vogue, which is the coveted print space for models, etc. Also another endangered profession, right? Authors, models, voice actors, anyways, all these endangered professions, I realized gave it a reach and also invited more people into the conversation where you don't have to have a PhD from MIT. I love to say if you have a face, you have a place in the conversation, and the media allows people to see and know that.
Nice, nice. That's beautiful. Thank you for what you're doing there. So you begin and end the book by describing you preparing to attend a White House event. And so many of us were just there, and there periodically for these various events. The more they're talking about AI, the more they're calling on folks like you. So from your perspective, what are the top priorities? We talked about tech companies. What about the administration and or Congress? What should they be focused on right now in regards to these conversations about AI regulation?
I really think that the AI blueprint, the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights, is a great starting point because it starts with what we value and the types of protections to keep in mind. So one of the protections, right, is protections from algorithmic discrimination. If that's a core value, what does that mean about the rest of the regulations you bring forward or the legislation? That we value privacy and consent, some of what we've been talking about just now. That AI systems are safe and effective. The effective part is really important. Sometimes we're adopting systems that have known biases. Portia Woodruff, who was arrested 8 months pregnant, she was arrested in 2023, 3 years after Robert Williams was arrested in front of his 2 young daughters by the same police department. Not safe or effective, in that regard. And so I really do think operationalizing what was in the blueprint is a good starting place. But I don't think that's enough. I think we also need to, again, have redress be a major part of it and think through biometric rights and creative rights.
Nice. And yeah, we need to see more. So, but I will say, in case folks don't realize, thanks to the work that Dr. Joy has done alongside so many researchers and partners in civil rights orgs like us at the Lawyers Committee and our Digital Justice Initiative, we now have an executive order on artificial intelligence. It's not the everything, but it certainly is an incredible start. So I think, credit to you for leading the way because you were doing this before we were and really giving us a North Star about where we should be heading. So now we know that we need law and regulation and it's in ways that can keep pace with the technological innovation. But we also, as you said earlier, we are the excoded. So we can't all wait for that to happen. What can we, the excoded, do to protect ourselves right now to prevent current and future harm?
One, I think, is to remember you have a right to refusal, right? And so that's what I was exercising on my way here, saying I opt out. And I was thinking maybe I should have a shirt that lets people know you can opt out of face recognition or whatever else it has. So I think one, exercising refusal. The other thing I've seen that I come back to time and time again is so basic but still crucial, the power of sharing your story. So my sharing my story as a grad student coding in a white mask and the way in which that connects with other people is important and it's valuable. So if you face some kind of AI issue, right, or you have questions as well, voicing it encourages others to raise their voice, and that's where we get to the collective action that's needed for the political pressure to then get to the systemic change, starting with sharing your story.
Beautiful. So just a few more questions before we open it up to you all in the audience. So you probably have so much that you want to think about and ask. So please get ready for that. And we have mics on at least one part right here. Thank you. So as I understand it, part of what drew you into the work that you do now is your excitement about the possibilities of the technology. And you kind of experienced some of the actual and potential harms. But at this point, are you still excited about the technology? I mean, do you think that we as a society can figure this stuff out in a way that we can actually all benefit from it?
I mean, my name's Joy, so I'm kind of always optimistic. I will put that out there, you know. I think about the 9-year-old me watching PBS and seeing Kismet the robot and being so enamored and thinking through, oh, what are the possibilities? Right. I think about grad school version of me, which not too long ago, wanting to build an Aspire mirror. So my mirror would say, hello, beautiful, in the morning, or make me look like Serena Williams or Coco Gauff or Sha'Carri Richard, or choose your favorite, whoever, inspiring you. Yes, right. So I am still in that space of having excitement about the possibilities of tech, but not so optimistic that without the regulations and the legislation put in place, that the way technology will roll out will actually support and advance those of us who are marginalized. And that will take intentional effort. So my optimism is measured, right, until I actually see laws on the books.
Fantastic. So if you haven't read the book, please do. We have, I know, copies here for purchase. But Dr. Joy, what do you want the audience and all the readers to walk away from? Take away, rather, after reading the book.
Yeah, so there's so much hype around AI. There's so much doomerism. I feel people are caught between fear and fascination. And this is really a book of hope because we show change is possible. We show the Brooklyn tenants resisting, the installation of a harmful system. We show a first-gen immigrant, going from a class project all the way to advising president, right? And so I hope that people feel encouraged, seen, that the questions and the doubts they struggle with are valid. But at the end, I hope you feel hopeful. And there are also lots of dessert references throughout, which you will see. So you might leave the book feeling a little hungry, but it's all good. Hope and hunger.
It's a sweet experience, I will say, reading the book. So you have been described, and you describe yourself as a poet of code. Now, we can say the thing speaks for itself because you actually delivered poetry to us earlier, recited from the book. But what does it mean for you, poet of code? How does it inform how you do your work on AI?
Well, I have to start at the beginning, and that is I'm the daughter of an artist and a scientist. So literally grew up with those worlds as companions. And within my work, I think it's so important to humanize the technical, because the technical is personal. And the personal, as we're seeing, is technical in this age, in this world of machines. And so for me, being a poet is very much so inviting us to take another look at the systems that we're adopting and to question it more.
Beautiful. Well, for fullness and completion, let's do a bookend. You started with poetry. Will you bless us with additional poetry?
Do y'all want a little more poetry? We want a little more poetry? Okay, all right. Okay. I won't disappoint the people, so I'll do one more poem. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can get out of this chair. All right, so speaking of hope, this last poem is for the Brooklyn tenants, and I wrote it for them because when I got connected, I was actually at a low point with my research. I wasn't sure if being an academic was going to have the kind of impact I was hoping for, because yes, it's great to have research papers and go to conferences, but were people who are actually being excoded being impacted? And the Brooklyn tenants took the research and they used it in their own community and within their own resistance campaigns. And I found that to be extremely inspiring. And so that led to this poem, To the Brooklyn Tenants. To the Brooklyn tenants, resisting and revealing the lie that we must accept the surrender of our faces, the harvesting of our data, the plunder of our traces. We celebrate your courage, no silence, no consent. You show the path to algorithmic justice requires a league, a sisterhood, a neighborhood, hallway gatherings, Sharpies and posters, book talks. I just had coalitions, petitions, testimonies, letters, research and potlucks, dancing and music, everyone playing a role to orchestrate change. To the Brooklyn tenants and freedom fighters around the world, prevailing and persisting against algorithms of oppression, automating inequality through weapons of math destruction. We stand with you in gratitude. You demonstrate that people have a voice and a choice when defiant melodies harmonize to elevate human life, dignity, and rights. The victory is ours. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Joy Buolamwini, thank you so much. So we have a mic. We ask folks to come to the mic and line up if you have questions for Dr. Joy. Questions do end with the squiggly, with the dot at the bottom, or, depending on the language, an upside down one, followed by another one. Please, go ahead.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay, all right. I know we have a lot of questions, so I'll try to be quick.
Wow, we got a queue. Yes, all good.
First, I just want to
We'll
say...
merge and alternate, by the way, so go ahead, please.
I just want to say you're really inspirational for a lot of young people. I'm a first-year college student. I've been following your work ever since Gender Shades, and so your work has really inspired a lot of like the casual research I did in high school, just about like algorithm bias and everything. So I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I guess my first question, okay, I'll just ask the first question. So my first question
You got
is...
a whole scroll.
No, I just have two. But so my question was, you talked a lot about how we should, I guess, take steps to help those who have already been harmed by AI, like not only thinking about the future, but thinking about AI harms that are in the present and in the past. And so I was wondering, I guess, especially with large language models, there's a lot of human artists and writers and creators whose work have been used without consent and without being compensated, being used to train all of these large AI models that are now everywhere, you know, with like Meta, Llama, it's like everywhere,
right.
with OpenAI, it's like all around us. And so I was wondering, as like from a legislative point of view or a legal point of view, or even from like our basic point of view, like what can we do to sort of like help that, or like what can these artists do? I guess that's just my question.
I read about this deeply in part 4. So I've been thinking one with creative rights. So as you mentioned, the issues of consent, the issues of compensation, also issues of control. You're talking about Llama, which is a open source large language model. And because of that, that means even more people have access to build these systems that have been trained on data some would say is stolen. Others would say awful but lawful. They're figuring it out in the courts, you know. But I do think when you have data sets that are specifically made of copyrighted materials, or you have data sets that have the watermarks, those sorts of excuses are a little bit harder to move over. So you also want control and you want credit. So what do we do? One of the things I've been thinking through is D3, deep data deletion. So what would it look like if you had to start over? What would it look like if you didn't just delete the data? So for example, you might say deletion, is that even feasible? Facebook deleted 1 billion face prints after a lawsuit that led to a $650 million fine for their use of probably many of our faces, right, in the creation of their facial recognition models. They didn't delete the model. So the system gets the data, it trains that model, and if you delete the data, you still have the model. So deep data deletion wouldn't just stop at the data. It would go to the models. And it wouldn't just stop at the model. So if you're thinking of large language models, then that ends up behind a product, right? So that would also mean you'd have to go to the product integration. So this is where I think the FTC, you know, could come into place. You've had regulators in different parts of the world. For example, Italian regulators had Clearview AI, which had scraped billions of photos of people's faces. They were mandated to delete the faces of those linked to Italy and so forth. So I do think if the political will is there, you can change what is acceptable.
Redress in action. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We're going to alternate if you and brother could step up to the mic.
Dr. Joy, I really appreciate your work. My business partner and I have actually built an AI platform, and a lot of what we've done in terms of philosophically has been a lot around some of the things that you've pointed out, and you've been pointing out for years. And so I just appreciate your work and want to continue to say that. My partner has a statement. He says that technology doesn't evolve, humans evolve, and then they demand different things of the technology to support them. And so when I think about the word demand, and I think about the Algorithmic Justice League, I think about what sort of things are we going to start to demand in terms of who gets to curate the data sets. And there's a lot of policy decisions that we can make around sort of protections and redress, what have you. But some of the things that I think about is, if you look at OpenAI and you look at ChatGPT, I think it was about 1,500 experts that were chosen to curate the data set, which was then used to train the models, and then they scraped everyone else's data to get there. What do we think about the possibility of demanding and maybe getting a stamp of approval similar to the Better Business Bureau, where the Justice League has essentially stamped and certified that this language model was produced by a representative set of people who were curating the data?
That's an interesting question. We've been approached by different organizations who want that stamp of approval, that Better Business Bureau. With something as dynamic as AI, I get concerned about those sorts of stamps because they become stale and they can become, you get greenwashing, you get ethics washing, etc. And when I think about AI, I don't just think about products as something that's static or data as something that's static. I think about processes. So how do you have an audit culture as a process? How do you think about the entire AI life cycle? So oftentimes the stamps people look for tend to be at the deployment stage of a product. But again, with that flat tire example, it had a stamp on it, but I got a flat now, right? You know, so I think through how do you have process change, right? So what is the process for consent when it comes to getting the data in the first place?
Right.
And then going through what is the process for deployment and actually monitoring the health of the system, because it's so dynamic as it's being applied to a variety of different areas.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Look
you.
to my right and to the left, please. And let's try to keep the questions as brief as we can to get as many in
I just
as we
got
can.
a comment.
Oh, appreciate you.
Thank you, Dr. Joy. I love you. Thank you for signing my book. I love you so much. Mine is I call AI Ain't I a Woman. Mine's is medical. Mine's is my mammogram. The software that is used to reach the deepness of my melanin and the texture of my breast, it broke me. Because not only that we had to do a retake of my imaging for cancer, it was 3 times. The radiologist was so apologetic, but there was nothing she could do because that's how AI sees me. It doesn't go deep. And that's my fear. How many of us will be sacrificed because AI can't detect or have not evolved to detect something that in any other woman like yourself detect with no problem. I want the fairness, and that's it. I thank you. I love y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Well said. Thank you.
Wow, I didn't realize that either. Hi. First of all, big fan. I work in national security, a woman working in national security. I'll let you read into that as you want to. Been professing your work for years. Following the White House, the DoD released their AI adoption strategy. I don't know if you had a chance to look at that, but essentially, what their framework is the adoption of advanced artificial intelligence capabilities to ensure U.S. warfighters maintain decision superiority on the battlefield for years to come. I just want to know your thoughts about that general paradigm.
I had an opportunity to serve on the EU Global Tech Panel some time ago, and one of the convenings included bringing in EU defense ministers. And this was a conversation ahead of discussing lethal autonomous weapon systems. And what I played ahead of that was AI Ain't I a Woman. And so bringing in poetry and centering Black women in that conversation was saying, before we get ahead of ourselves at the promise of the capabilities, let's look at the reality. So I continue to be a supporter of the campaign to stop killer robots. I don't think we should give machines the kill decision in the first place. And one of the things I see oftentimes can hinder putting in protections for discrimination and other harmful uses of AI tends to be national security. If we don't do it, China or Russia or whoever else will do it. And I'm thinking, who loses, right? If humanity loses because we're trying to outpace, outchase, claim supremacy, reign indefinitely, I question the whole objective. And I, at the same time, understand that people like you and others in national security are truly doing your best to keep us safe as well. So it's, when do the narratives match the reality?
Exactly. Thank you for your thoughts.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Joy. It's incredible to meet you. I'm so inspired by your work. I've been following your work ever since interning on the Hill last year, and now algorithmic bias and researching algorithmic bias has become my new focus. And so my question for you is, what is a piece of advice you wish someone had told you before you entered the tech space that would help Black students like me enter the tech space?
We need you. Your voice is essential. It's not nice to, look what happens when we not in the room. We out here coding in white masks. Right? So that I would affirm how important and how valuable you are and your perspective is. And the other thing I would encourage, as I mentioned earlier, when I wanted to do this research, like, are you sure? I would say if you think it's important, that's enough to pursue your ideas.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Please.
Hi, my name's Maurice, work in tech policy. I have a question about just having a more fulsome conversation with the community, including everyone who's impacted by this. And I think that from what I've seen or I've observed is that there's a lack of precision when we're talking about our expectations on the accuracy of AI and these AI-powered systems. It goes all the way from we expect them to be perfect, to we expect them to be better than humans, maybe equal to an average human, to maybe even just more accountable to a human than a human would be. And so it's like, I feel like we're going back and forth depending on what the particular issue is and sort of like what our expectations are. So I'd like to hear some thoughts from you about how we can be more precise in our expectations about these different use cases in AI, and sort of as a prompt. You mentioned that there was a young woman, 8 months pregnant, inaccurately identified by AI, put in jail. But for some people, they might want to have just that basic level of AI accountability, whereas if it was a human police officer, they could just pull her over for no justification. There would be no accountability as to why that happened or what the accuracy level was.
Well, this is a great question. One of the biggest takeaways I've had from my research is going beyond accuracy and going beyond the technical piece and considering the socio-technical. Because even if we had perfectly accurate AI systems, right now we have the tools of a surveillance state that in the hands of an authoritarian government, the way you're tracked now with your phone, at least you can leave your phone at home. Did you leave your face at home? Faces are a little harder to leave at home. So that's something that I think about on the accuracy question, right? It's not just how well these systems work, but how are they being used in the first place?
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm much older, but I'm very inspired by you still, and may go and do my PhD, as others have talked about. What I wanted to ask you about is, so one of the things that we're doing is we are ossifying our mores in a lot of these systems that we're building. And at what point do you think we're going to start having a conversation that is global in its approach, in the languages that are taken into consideration, into the various cultural, because there is this question of morality that comes in. So I'm very excited that this declaration has come up. I'm very excited that we have a UN task force. But at what point are we going to actually, do you think, work with this as a, a humanities kind of approach versus nation states approach to the technology?
In some ways, that's already happening. It's just not what's going to be in the headlines, right? I think about spaces like the Distributed AI Research group, which was started by Dr. Timnit Gebru, and they have researchers from the Global South specifically who are setting the agenda, who are exploring all other types of languages, right, for language models. You have people who are talking about data sovereignty, right, to say we're not giving our data for free, but here's a license agreement, right, if you want some aspect of our culture integrated into particular systems. I think that's where the storytelling piece is so important. What I appreciated about the film Coded Bias is when you see the experts within that film, it's showing you something that you would say, you don't usually see that in tech, right? These aren't the typical experts, women of color. So I think part of it is platforming those who are doing that work.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. So sorry, but I think we have a little, maybe time
No
afterwards for
pressure.
So,
Final
speak for the group.
question.
Oh, okay, I'll try my best. First of all, thank you both for being here and sharing your experiences, and thank you to everyone who helped make this event possible. Really appreciate that. So I'm a robotics researcher and also a faculty member at George Mason. I'm here with one of my colleagues, and we're so excited to listen to you talk. So we're also behavioral scientists, and my question is really about a question that was raised earlier, and the question earlier was really about the speed at which the research could keep up with the technological development. And as behavioral scientists, one of the huge challenges that we have is when we do research with people, we are duty bound to go through ethical review boards and processes and consent forms, and it takes a long time to do that research, and it should, to ensure that our research is not going to harm our research participants. But on the flip side, so for instance, if we want to do studies where we have students drive around in Teslas and use their autonomous features, it takes years to get approvals for those things. Meanwhile, Tesla can freely experiment on the public all day long. So my question for you all is, in your conversations in the policy space, through your actions with the Algorithmic Justice League and others, are people really starting to talk about that problem, the fact that, as researchers, it sometimes is impossible and should be for good reasons for us to keep up with some of these developments? And if it's not happening or you think needs to happen more, how can people like me, my colleagues on the faculty, my students, make those conversations more salient? Because we want to do good work and we should do good work, but we are ethically bound to make sure we're doing it, whereas a lot of these companies are not in any way.
Yes, I don't think the answer is to lower the bar. And I write about this in the book because as a student, when I was collecting face data sets and I was going and looking at IRB, the institutional review boards, to your point, ethical steps to take to make sure we don't repeat some tragic things of the past.
Right.
I had an exception because the face data I was collecting wasn't for biomedical purposes. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wait, this isn't human subjects research. It's literally your face. This is not a human subject. And I had a pass and I was asking other researchers about it. And they're like, we ain't trying to have more red tape. Mm-hmm. Take your exception. Why are you asking all these questions? So I was like, okay, that's just how we do things here. And I would write, we would scrape data off the internet. A lot of the sins I talk about in the book, I was part of it because this is literally how you're taught to do things. You don't even question it. Like, here's the playbook. Hit play. Now you're trying to rewind, reverse, etc. And there's a lot of pushback. So I would actually say push people to be more considerate with how they are doing the research, which would mean putting in regulations for the companies, right? Because I do think we need more thoughtful and more deliberate research like what you and your colleagues have been doing.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Well, Dr. Joy, you know, this work is hard. This work requires smarts, it requires a lot of heart. And at the Lawyers Committee, we like to say there should be joy in the struggle.
Oh,
you are.
Okay.
You are that joy.
Thank you.
Literally and figuratively. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all so much.